Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Harmful Algal Bloom Task Force meeting. Welcome, public, members of the task force. Just as a reminder, we are live streaming on the FWC YouTube channel, youtube.com/FWC research. And you can visit myfwc.com/HAB task force for links for the task force. Before we get started, we will do roll call. So I will go through our task force members, and if you could please say present. Don Anderson. Oh, I saw he just popped in. Don, we just called on you.
Okay, I'm here. I'm in Alaska, but I'm here. It's pretty early out here.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Emily Cooley.
Present.
Dwayne DeFries.
Present.
Quay Dortch.
Present.
Charles Jacoby.
Present.
Barb Kirkpatrick.
I'm here.
Sherry Larkin.
Present.
Michelle Smith.
Present.
Rhonda Watkins.
Here.
And David Whiting.
Present.
Great, thanks everyone. So I just wanted to provide a note. Our public comment period today is at 10:45, and we will post a call-in number then. But we also accept public comments all the time at our task force website. I gave that, but the website again is myfwc.com/HAB task force, HAB task force. And there's a red button at the top that says public comment form. So just to give a quick overview of today's agenda and meeting goals, we will have some speakers and presentations. This morning, we'll have roundtable updates from several of our working groups. We'll have federal partners join the call to give some overviews of some different ongoing efforts. And then we also have two of our HAB task force grant recipient members joining us today to discuss project progress. So they'll be giving presentations, and those will be focused on improved biophysical bloom modeling, as well as a new tool for vulnerability assessments. We'll have the public comment period, and then we'll descend into discussion of some of our next priorities, including a focus on our next grant call. So with that, I'm going to get started and give just a brief update on bloom status. And in fact, I will say that no news is good news in the case of the Coronia brevis bloom this year. It is now the end of January. We have not observed the onset of a bloom in 2023 into 2024. This is good news. We're still obviously monitoring really closely to try to make sure that one doesn't develop. If one does, we are out there. We are also starting to look more at what some of the mechanisms or reasoning in terms of why we maybe have not had a bloom this year, and some of the different things that are being considered. But again, it's still very preliminary and too soon to say anything. But we did have a pretty intense hurricane, Idalia, pass through the storm, or pass through the initiative region and the West Florida shelf. We also had abnormal seasonal temperatures this summer, and we had some other anomalous features in the northern Gulf and the southern Gulf, including, again, sea surface temperatures, but also some chlorophyll features. So trying to diagnose a little bit more as to what might have happened this past year, looking ahead. But again, we're still monitoring in the off chance that a bloom could start. So again, glad to provide that overview here. And I think that I'll just pause and see if there are any questions about bloom updates or lack thereof.
Kate, I'll just make a comment. It's probably completely coincidental, but it is perhaps of note that in the Northeast, in the Gulf of Maine, the very same thing happened. We essentially had no toxicity to speak of in the Gulf of Maine proper throughout the entire bloom season for Alexandrium. Now we do have a huge temperature anomaly off in the Northwest Atlantic, and maybe that has affected things. We have a meeting coming up where we've asked Rick Stump and Ishen to use the modeling results and the hydrographic data to see if they can tease out any possible mechanism. But so we're doing very much the same thing you are, for the same reason.
Sounds like there might be some opportunities to think about that on a cross-regional scale as things develop. So it's good to hear that there were not a lot of HAB occurrences on the east coast of the US, and also good to try to dig into why. Any other comments or questions? Okay. So with that, let's move into our working group updates. And I'd like to start out with Emily Cooley from Department of Health to provide an overview, some updates from the HAB Health Working Group. Emily?
Thank you, Kate. Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Good. Okay. Yes, so I'll give a few updates of what happened in the last HAB Health Working Group meeting. But first, I just wanted to give a quick overview because I saw some new faces on the call today. So the HAB Health Working Group was established to take an active role in addressing issues as identified by the Florida HAB Task Force and associated state agencies. This HAB Health Working Group is led by Florida Department of Health with collaboration from FWC. And the group serves as consultants to help identify research needs and associated improvements to the surveillance, reporting, and education methods that will eventually contribute to the reduction, hopefully, of negative short and long-term health effects related to HAB exposure. Members of the working group consist of representatives from government agencies, scientists, and health providers with HAB expertise. So I'll get into some of the updates. Our last meeting occurred on November 1st, 2023. During this meeting, the group discussed and started to compose a draft chronic HAB exposure statement at the request of the HAB Communications Working Group. So members were asked to draft language to address the unknowns associated with the chronic effects of algal bloom exposure in Florida, and just some ideas about what is being done at this time. The drafting of the statement is going to continue and be discussed and also refined during our next meeting, which is set to occur on February 14th, 2024, so just in a few weeks. And another part of the meeting that occurred, so a new thing that we kind of introduced is that the group has also started inviting researchers to present their HAB Health research to the group, the HAB Health Working Group, in order to help the group learn about HAB Health research that's occurring in Florida. So during our last meeting, we invited a group from Florida Atlantic University to present their research, and for our upcoming meeting in February, we have invited the University of Miami to discuss their HAB Health research to the HAB Health Working Group members. And one other topic that we also dove into during our last meeting is we brainstormed ways to improve the information shared about occupational exposures to HABs. So the group started drafting known exposure information. Specifically, we were talking about Coronia brevis or red tide in Florida. And the group was asked to identify some routes of exposure, for example, inhalation, ingestion, or dermal exposure for various occupations. And so we talked about known prevention and treatment options and some references that we have available already. And again, in our next meeting in February, we're going to continue this conversation and kind of refine and get some more definitive information about occupational exposures to HABs, and hopefully get that going. In Florida, we have some information available already, but we just want to get more information available to the occupational workers that are around HABs. So our next meeting will be February 14th, 2024. And I think that is all the updates that I have. So any questions?
Emily, I have a comment. I'm wondering if, I'm not sure if this has been discussed yet, or to what extent, but I wonder if there could be something like a workshop or something planned for the future, just to help provide another venue for sharing some of this research. And I think it would be great if the working group could potentially discuss some different strategies for that.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's another point that I meant to bring up, so thank you. We've talked about that before, putting together kind of a workshop or just a meeting, but it's in the early phases. So another thing that we asked the working group members to bring back to our next meeting in February, if they can, is a list of research for HAB Health research that is going on in Florida. So Florida Department of Health, we know of a couple of research studies that are going on. And so we know of the ones that are going on from our perspective, but we may not know of all the ones that are going on in Florida. So we would love to compile a list so that we can share among all researchers, state agencies, anybody who requests it, so that we can kind of all be on the same page and not reinvent the wheel. And so, yeah, in the future meeting, we're hoping to get all of the members to contribute to what's going on in Florida, all the research studies that are happening. And so we can kind of get that all together in one place. And there is, it's a good avenue to share information. And so that's another reason that we're having the research studies that we know that are going on presenting to the group. And so that they can be aware of what's going on and then kind of brainstorm new ideas. But note it down. We'll discuss that again in the next meeting.
So much. Any other questions or comments for Emily? Dave?
And this is all human health effects related to exposure to brevetoxin, or is it larger than that?
Right now, the working group has been looking at brevetoxin and Cornea brevis, red tide, but the plan is to also look at blue-green algae. We've just kind of started with red tide for now.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks so much, Emily. I also like the example that you provided of how the different working groups can interface to kind of inform each other. And that is a good segue to hand things over to Chuck Jacoby for an update from the HAB Communications Working Group. Chuck?
There we go. Okay, so yeah, the HAB Communications Working Group tries to address issues raised in the task force, particularly dealing with communication to the public. And our membership is, fairly diverse, state agencies, counties, NGOs, and we meet every other month. So our next meeting will be the 8th of February. We're currently working on another video, a short video like the last couple, and this one's on navigating resources, where we're trying to do something that will have a lifespan. So it's a kind of a fine line to walk, not trying to put exact details, but giving people enough information so they know what they can find when they want to go find it. But a lot of this is still moving and it hasn't really settled down. So we're trying to get ahead of it if we can. We have ongoing things regarding terms to use or avoid, myths and truths, and frequently asked questions. So we just keep gathering those up as we go. Working on trying to get a better line of communication with the seafood and restaurant sectors, so that that information can flow to them and from them as it were. We'll try to devise something of a list of individual actions that people can take, everything from just self-efficacy to, you know, sort of ecosystem protection. So that's one of our priorities for the upcoming period of time. As Emily said, you know, we're trying to get a message about chronic exposure put together, and the HAB Health Working Group is taking the lead on that one. You know, I mean, ultimately, basically trying to develop a bunch of two-way communication streams so that information flows out and in as effectively as possible.
Thanks. And Chuck, maybe just if you could comment on the extent to which that ends up being kind of a single toolkit or kind of more directed communication, or is that still up in the air? Kind of how that will be ultimately packaged.
The overall communication plan is, you know, in a sense, still sort of being developed. So, you know, FWC's taken the lead on trying to have a website where a lot of this can live. You know, and obviously we've worked with other agencies to make sure that we have links back and forth among all that. Yeah, so hopefully what will happen is there'll be a kind of a network of places where information can flow.
Barb?
Yeah. Do you have like for the videos, Chuck, do you guys have a budget for this, or is FWI, who's producing the videos and how are we paying for it?
So I believe the funds are flowing through FWC. So
okay.
That they have so far. And then, you know, they sort of take the lead on liaising with the people that put it together. So.
Okay. And then same way with Emily with a possible workshop. There are funds available, Kate, for the health group to have some kind of in-person workshop?
I think that would need to be discussed and sort of fleshed out, and then it would be a multi-agency discussion.
Okay.
But I'm guessing that something like that could be coordinated. Workshops can be small things attended by, you know, 10 people, or they can be 300 people. So that's where I also am a little hesitant to commit without a scale tied to that.
Fair enough. Yep. Okay, thanks.
And I was going to also add in workshop in person, but we could also offer virtual meeting, and so that would cut down.
Any other questions for Chuck? All right, well, thanks so much, Chuck. And thanks to both working groups. I will switch gears a little bit now. I'll hand things over to Megan Abbott for some updates on some of the statewide response planning efforts that have been ongoing. Megan?
Sure. I just put up a couple simple slides here. So you've seen, oh, well, if it will slide, hold on. You've seen this before, but I will go back and just refresh everyone on what the Red Tide tabletop response exercises are. So the HAB task force identified in all of its consensus documents that there's a need to develop a coordinated collaborative response effort for Red Tide. Now we think that, well, we know that there is really good interagency job working on this in terms of monitoring and response, but a lot of that is institutional knowledge and people relationships. So the point of This is to make it a little bit more accessible to people at different levels and joining. So what we did is establish an interagency planning committee in 2021, and that involves all the key agencies involved with red tide response: the Department of Environmental Protection, Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, and the Department of Health. And then in April 2022, we did a state level tabletop to first map how the agencies coordinate and respond to events. And we present a number of different types of scenarios in these based on past experiences and possible future type events that may occur from the public to industry. And once we mapped that, we identified all the counties that are from low to high impact, and we've been working with them in groups to have regional tabletops to try and map with the same type of scenarios, the intersection between local and county and the state, so that that communication and resources flow at the right point. It's not to map their particular local or county response efforts. They have those plans themselves, but where they might interface with the state to make sure that there's a good flow of language and understanding of where to access those resources. All the exercises and scenarios have gone through a lot of different review stages with leaders from different counties and local government as well as state. So they're well representative of the types of scenarios that they might encounter during events. We've done this now with Sarasota and Collier counties. We're moving to Pinellas and Lee, and we have a schedule set out from the Southwest to the Panhandle to complete those grouped county exercises this calendar year. And then in the lower impacted regions in along the Atlantic coast, we will likely host that more of a group workshop with those areas to talk through it, because they're not as familiar they don't experience events as often. So what is the ultimate end result of this? It will be a very simple, or simple, not simple, but if you're common with emergency response, such as hurricanes and other events, they'll have these guides. So we're developing a multi-agency guidance for red tide events in Florida. This goes through a brief overview, a page or two of the purpose and objectives, and then it gives some detail on the operations. And those are again, that interface where counties to state level go on and what the efforts are and what the communications, when they happen and how they happen, who the authorities are, and then testing the matrices and flowcharts that exist in the HAB Health Response Resource Guide, but they will also live in here, so that you'll have about 5 to 10 page resource guide that if you were new or an event was new to you coming into an agency, you could open a document, you would know under which situation, how to respond, who to call, and hopefully create a nice flow where it's not just personal knowledge within the agencies, but something that can be very actionable and have everyone gain good awareness. So that is where we are now.
Thanks so much, Megan. Any questions for Megan? Okay. So I saw David Kidwell from NOAA join us. Welcome, Dave. Good morning. Dave's going to give us a little update on where we're at with the South Florida Clean Coastal Waters Act assessment. And so Dave, I'll kind of hand things over to you.
Sounds good, Kate. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to move relatively quickly through this. Hey, Donna, so you raised your hand there. Since I think most of you have seen much of this information that I'm going to talk about this morning, but at any rate, I figured I would give just a quick update. Hopefully you're able to see my slides now. Please let me know if you cannot. Okay, I see some head nods. So just as a quick reminder, this is all stemming from legislation that was passed about 1.5 years ago called the South Florida Clean Coastal Waters Act, which directed the federal agencies, specifically through the interagency working group for HABs and hypoxia to develop a suite of products related to HABs and hypoxia in South Florida. And so much of what I'm going to talk about this morning is the first product, which is what's called the interim scientific assessment, and which the name suggests is a scientific review of HABs and hypoxia in South Florida, but only a draft, with the final coming due here in another couple of years. One thing I'll flag is on the map there, you can see the geography that we focused on. So really wanting to be incumbent not only of red tide on the West Coast, but also in part based on the legislative guidance that we received, making sure that we're encompassing waters that are relevant to the Indian River Lagoon and then points south. Just again, a quick overview of some of the process that we deployed to develop our interim assessment, our interim scientific assessment over the last year. I think many of you are aware that we spent much of the latter half of 2022 and the early parts of 2023 doing resource gathering, reaching out to folks such as yourselves and others, trying to learn more and understand greater what is already being done by state agencies and other entities in South Florida around HABs and hypoxia. This sort of reaching out and engagement period culminated in this late June period of 2023 when the federal agencies, or at least sort of the key point people, traveled to 3 locations in South Florida over the span of a week for a series of listening sessions where we invited a suite of organizations and other entities in South Florida to come and speak with us, have a facilitated conversation about some of the challenges and issues that they're seeing with HABs and hypoxia, as well as some of the activities that they are aware of, just again trying to ensure they're being as encompassing as possible. And then we've met regularly with some of the agencies on this call, making sure that we're coordinating as best we can, again, getting feedback, but also listening and trying to better tailor our report to meet some of the needs of the issues that you're dealing with, for instance, on this call here. I can't share, unfortunately, much of the details that's currently in the draft assessment, and I'll get to where it's at here in a second. But what I can do is kind of just give you a quick highlight of how we organized the report. So we broke it up into freshwater and then marine and estuarine sections, and then you can see some of the major categories of information that we are including the causes and consequences of HABs and hypoxia, as well as the opportunities and current science around mitigation, control, and prevention activities. And so the legislation named a number of key water bodies that were to be included in the assessment. And so in addition to these major freshwater and marine estuarine sections, there are further subsections that highlight some of these major water bodies like the Indian River Lagoon, like Lake Okeechobee, et cetera, where we talk about some of these specific topics. We also walk through at the end some of the roles and responsibilities, in very short manner at least, other federal agencies and some of the key state agencies that are working on this topic. So one of the things that I want to highlight of what this report is and what this report is not. So this interim scientific assessment, again, as the name suggests, is a scientific assessment. It's essentially a science review of HABs and hypoxia in South Florida. We hope that this is going to be the launching point for what will be the subsequent products, particularly on development of a federal action plan for HABs and hypoxia in South Florida. But we also hope that it's useful and relevant to groups such as this as you're doing your work at the state level for addressing this issue. But one of the things that I want to highlight of what will not be in this report, and I think I've said this before, is that we do not envision this report being prescriptive. You know, do X or do Y, and that will solve your HAB and hypoxia issues. What we're really emphasizing is the science that we see, the science that, as we did when we did the review and did our assessment of HABs and hypoxia, the science, and summarizing that as succinctly as possible in the report, so that then groups such as yourselves and others can then take that and then have the policy level deliberations for how to move forward. One thing I will flag as I use the word succinctly, this is a monster of a report in its current form. As you might suspect, there's been a lot of work on HABs and hypoxia in South Florida, and this report is inclusive of a lot of that work. And so it is a fairly lengthy report, but we think addresses much of the issue. So the report is written, at least in its current draft form. It's cleared the interagency working group, and it is currently undergoing policy review that will eventually culminate going to the Office of Management and Budget for the federal government. to be completely frank, that is a black box to us. It can stay there for some time. It can take anywhere from 3+ months from when it enters that point before the report is approved, or they might come to us with suggested revisions or required revisions and changes. And so the report, while I say it's done and out of the IWG, it's still going through that review, and it's going to be some time, unfortunately, we're talking months before it's likely going to be able to be made public and delivered to Congress and to any other constituents that are going to be interested. One thing you'll note in the chart there is some of the next timelines of what's coming up next with the final action plan and the final assessment that will be due in 2025. And so we're going to be pivoting relatively quickly once this is made public and once this scientific assessment is approved to then working on these additional products. So one of the key things I want to highlight, I keep using the word interim scientific assessment. You can see a final assessment is going to be due in 2025. We absolutely envision and plan to have additional feedback and additional opportunities for input from groups such as this and others in South Florida once the report is released to let us know what we're missing, what we missed, or things that should be emphasized or any additional questions or comments that you may have. And so, again, very much viewing this as an iterative step leading to what will be the final action plan and the final scientific assessment. Last thing I'm going to do, I'm going to completely pivot to something that I think may be of interest to folks on this call, and that is just to give a quick highlight and summarization of the Harmful Algal Bloom and Hypoxia Research and Control Act. This is the piece of legislation that has been around for some time now that authorizes and sort of directs from congressionally the activities of the federal agencies as it pertains to HABs and hypoxia. And it is currently up for reauthorization. And so there's been a lot of activity over the last year that's culminated in a series of draft bills that have been released in the House of Representatives by Representatives Joyce and Representatives of Bonamici. And you can see it's HR 6235 that they've released for reauthorizing HABARCA. In the Senate, it's Senators Baldwin and Senators Sullivan who have released Senate Bill 3348. And those have been referred to various committees. Don Anderson attended at the invitation of the House Natural Resources Committee, a subcommittee hearing on HABARCA a couple weeks ago where there was some robust question and answer. I think we were all happy to hear that that there was relatively, I would say, broad support for reauthorization for HABARCA, as well as a couple of other bills that were being discussed at that House hearing. And so we'll see what happens in terms of what the final product looks like. There are some differences between the House bill and the Senate bill, but nonetheless, we view much of the changes that we've seen in the current releases of these reauthorized bills to be beneficial. And so here's just a quick table that summarizes some of those changes that we've seen in the two versions that have come out. Probably the most important one is streamlining the reporting process. While I know groups such as this are very interested in the South Florida specific report, that's getting to be a lot, frankly. We have a lot of reports that we're doing. It's taking away from a lot of the other activities of the interagency working group. And so we're working to streamline or hoping to streamline through these reauthorized bills, the reporting requirements. I'll note, I don't envision it impacting what I just talked about with South Florida all that much. And so all that is still going to happen. The other thing that we've been emphasizing is trying to clarify roles of agencies, particularly as it pertains to freshwater, and be very clear about EPA having a very explicit role when it comes to freshwater HABs within HABARCA. And so as you can see, both bills, at least from the EPA perspective, were inclusive of that in their legislation. A little bit of differences between some of the nuances in the House versus the Senate bill on some of the dividing lines between how jurisdiction around freshwater and marine HABs and hypoxia, but I think relatively minor things that we're already working through and working around that we can continue to do. We have both versions include additional updates for what can be considered, so including cultural and social science-based impacts of HABs and hypoxia, as well as one of the things I'll highlight is both bills also more explicitly call out macroalgae. While we have been assuming and working as if macroalgae such as sargassum are inclusive in HABARCA, it's not been explicit. And so both of the versions of the bill, the House and the Senate bill, are currently reflective of that. And then as some of you are aware, there's been provisions that was new in the last HABARCA around the events of national significance effort. There's been varying changes that have been made in both versions to make some improvements to that effort. We'll see where that ends in terms of the final passage of the bill. but nonetheless, here's just a quick summary of what's in there. Final thing I'll mention is it does also explicitly authorize two larger realms of activity for the federal agencies. One is a national level incubator around HAB control technologies. And this is actively being done right now in partnership with Mote Marine Lab and the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. And this kind of formally authorizes that as a means to move forward. And so I think it really does actually leverage a lot of the activities and efforts that have been ongoing for the past number of years in the state of Florida, as well as it formally authorizes the execution and implementation of a national harmful algal bloom observing network, or NHAB. I think many of you are familiar with that. This is trying to get from a research and development framework when it comes to observation technologies and approaches to a more operational framework for how we're monitoring HABs. And so I know that the last several slides here were a little extra beyond what I was asked to speak about, but I thought there'd be some interest from the group in hearing where some of the federal legislation stands on this. And so with that, happy to take any questions from others if there is some time.
Thanks so much. We really appreciate those extra updates. I'll pause and see if anyone has any questions. I know, just to point out that we've really appreciated the opportunity to meet with the IWG and the Blue-Green Task Force, just with the ability to kind of stay ahead of releases and to also be able to develop communication strategies, knowing that things will be released. So I know that we've been really grateful to be involved in that. It's also really exciting to see those new developments or things going through Congress. So thanks. Any other questions or comments? All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Dave.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. So we will now transition. So Dave mentioned the HAB incubator, and we'll now transition to a presentation from Kevin Claridge from Mote Marine Lab. He'll discuss a little bit more about the HAB incubator and some of the different challenges potentially, and also progress. So I'll turn it over to Kevin. I'll let Kevin go. We also have some other participants on the call that we can introduce after Kevin speaks, in case there are questions that come up.
Thanks, Kate. Hear me okay? Yeah. And
yes, we can.
Thanks. Dave teed it up perfect with talking about the HAB incubator. That was a great segue. So I just wanted to give a quick update on the Red Tide initiative. That might be a little duplicative for those that joined the Red Tide task force, no, not task force, Technology Advisory Council meeting that was last week, or some of even these US HAB CTI, the Control Technology Incubator updates may be a little repetitive. We hosted a webinar earlier this month on our open call for proposals. So sorry if these duplicate a little bit. Joining me on the HAB CTI latter half of this presentation, I'll just give a few updates on the initiative, but mostly on the incubator, are Taylor Armstrong and Felix Martinez, our partners from Maryland and NOAA, that can chime in and add some updates as well. Thanks, Megan, for helping me move through the slides here this morning. If you could go to next. So I just added this at the beginning as a reminder. I think everyone's seen this slide before. There's a lot on here, but in short, mitigation science of moving things from the tabletop to the tanks, in a lab setting, to near shore where you're in the canal and the marinas, to eventually, hopefully, further offshore where you're in the larger deployment scenarios. At the bottom, you can see all the different challenges along the way. We'll talk a little bit more about some of those, and we have at this task force in past, but it's walking these technologies and tools through this tiered process or phased process, depending on how you look at it, basically the same, trying to work through these challenges and which one should continue safely for possible environmental use. So next. Quickly on the Red Tide Initiative, if you haven't seen on the MOAT website, the picture on the left is the updated Red Tide Initiative report. This is required each year that we submit to the governor, legislature, and agency heads. So the link is available there, and I'll have some hard copies also available in Tallahassee. I'll be up for Oceans Day in a couple of weeks if anyone's interested, or happy to always give you a hard copy mailed to you. A lot of information on the right. You've seen some of this before. A lot of progress over the last 5 years. We're just about to enter the last year of the Florida Red Tide Mitigation and Technology Development Initiative, the year 6 partnership between MOAT and the state. And really bottom line is there on the bottom in red. We have about a dozen, maybe 15 tools that from the hundreds that we've looked at that are moving towards those that field deployment, commercialization, implementation step. So if you could go to the next, Megan. And these are just to whip through. I know we always show a lot of projects, but we've worked with a lot of different companies and businesses and institutions and NGOs and really looking at all different types of things. And here's some that were funded in the year 5 round with the Red Tide Initiative. Percarbonate, a hydrocarbon degrader, some a mixed compound that already exists for other uses from Heartland there, citric acid, oil, soap bark, some naturally plant-based algicides that MOAT's working on. You've seen presentations, or if you've been at some of the workshops about Prescott Water's technology with trying to largely focus on cavitation. Next slide. Some different mixes with clay. You see with Tulane working with some with the calcium peroxide, or all the work that Woods Hole and Don Anderson have done now in partnership with University of Rhode Island of clay or modified clay, and some attaching them to possibly some algicide or allelopathic chemicals. Also some other things like the low power electromagnetic energy, or some things from like Ultratech, where we've looked at archaea or bacteria compounds. And also the bottom bullet there, that this doesn't mean this is all encompassing. You think of that tiered process. Some things have started in tier 1, had to go back to, or got to tier 2, had to go back to tier 1, got up to almost to tier 3. Maybe it was UV light or a flocculant or an algicide or allelopathic, a whole suite of things that have kind of juggled across those tiers to try to eventually get into that tier 4 field deployment scenario. So there's several that are in the pipeline, I guess you could say, that will continually try to move up as we work with these different entities. Next slide. Thanks, Megan. So we're looking ahead for the coming year. What does it look like? Obviously, I mentioned the year 6. We plan to have another TAC meeting this fall, probably in person at the Red Tide facility. We'd love to have everybody interested to come out and get in a little more detail. We've had 2 different workshops. You see the pictures there, 2022 and 2023, with 75 plus attendees, both in person and virtually. And you've heard this, we've been working through all the different pieces of the puzzle. I'll highlight just a little bit more in a second, but for the coming year, hyper focused on getting into what kind of data do we want to collect when we move into the field? What kind of cell counts do we want? What pre and post and ambient conditions and species and monitoring? How long do we monitor? How are we going to go back and tweak products that have gone through some of these regulatory steps to get to this far? So we're at a good spot. But each step of this initiative has created a new problem, a new Rubik's Cube to unravel, and good progress made, but we are now moving into that, what do we want to look at when you start to get into the field? A good component, those last 2 bullets, that's okay, you can stay here, Megan. The last 2 bullets, we're moving on to the leveraging side of things as well, also with the US HAB incubator. We'll move into that side of the presentation, and also in some great partnerships and leveraging with the state of Florida's HAB Technologies grant program. I got a slide at the end about that. Some good synergies and proof of concept across some other funding sources. But this slide, I always just like to throw up. I first presented it at the international meeting had out there in Seattle. Don was there. Oscar to chime in maybe in a second on the next slide. But when you start to think of mitigation tools, you really have to think of all these different tiers and this entire puzzle in its entirety when someone comes to you with the science and the cells and the technology and the affordability and the scalability and the regulations and the marketing. It's a mess, but it's you really have, before you start down that path, you really got to think of, is it worth continuing with that product to try to get all the way through? And you can do your best to answer those questions, all the way from the tabletop to the mesocosms or the raceways to the early field deployment stuff. But sometimes you can't answer them all, but you sure want to be able to look at those and see if it's worth the squeeze. Next slide. I think I showed this last time at this task force meeting. I keep adding new blocks to this, I think, as I unravel more and more. And this leads into our discussion about the HAB Control Technologies Incubator, the clearinghouse piece, which we'll slide to next. But you can see you're starting with the EPA approvals. Does it involve federal funding? Then, at least for Florida and most states, you're moving into some kind of a pesticide registration or oversight organization. Then you're moving into some kind of environmental protection or water oversight regulatory group in each of the states. And so for Florida, obviously Department of Environmental Protection could trigger several different types of permitting, some delegated down from the feds again, such as NPDES or some of the navigation stuff. Or a pesticide generic permit, considering actually what chemical you're using and you're putting it into the water. Also, Army Corps of Engineers, do they have concern of putting something on the bottom, or navigation concerns? We've talked about Department of Health and any kind of dermal, or if you're aerosolizing anything, any public interaction obviously is a big concern. So a heck of a puzzle each time. That's why I say when you start to think about a mitigation tool, you got to think through all of these steps, and will you get to the end? The circle on the right, I always add that it's when you get into some of these smaller companies, when they bring innovative, novel ideas, which is outstanding, which we want to have some new things coming, you got to start thinking also about when you do get to the end of the maze to get into the field for business stand up. Okay, capital investment, how do you ramp these up? Supply chain scalability, that kind of stuff, and helping that smaller entity get going. Next slide. So all this said, a lot of this led and expanding and expounding upon it with the US HAB CTI. Again, joining me is Felix and Taylor from the NOAA and CTI seats. You've heard about this partnership, and Dave just highlighted it as well. That's great news to hear. Some authorization highlighting the progress being made in this, and we're really still just getting going. Next slide. And really, Taylor or Felix, feel free to jump in. Maybe I'll ask Taylor if you highlight a little bit more on the clearinghouse thing, if you got some thoughts. But again, a refresher on CTI is freshwater and marine, real world feasibility. I can't harp enough, all those different scalable, environmental acceptable, cost effective. We've heard this licensing and permitting stuff. And then also the CTI is a way to capture and archive this information so that it can be used for reused and found once the science continues. Taylor, anything to add on the clearinghouse progress or side of things? I know still a work in progress as we're continuing to put that together.
Yeah, it's definitely a work in progress. I would say Felix and I have started having conversations about really the first step is to kind of have a workshop looking at getting the information for the clearinghouse website. So we kind of foresee tackling kind of 3 issues. Really, when is it feasible to use a control technology? In what situations do you really want to be controlling the harmful algal blooms? And is it realistic to control harmful algal blooms? And then also for kind of what you're talking about, we want to understand the federal and state requirements of the research, the tier 1 and tier 2, what specific research projects need to occur and what questions need to be answered in order for a control technology to be used. And then we really want to get everybody, all specific federal and state agencies together to understand all of the licensing and regulation issues, because it really depends if you're talking about a physical or a chemical or a biological control method. And even within those, is it a synthetic chemical? Is it a natural chemical? So it really, there's just so much. It's like you said, it's a Rubik's Cube, and we're just trying to tease it apart and understand how, if we identify a control method that works, how can we get it federally and state approved to be used?
Well said. Thanks, Taylor. Megan, next slide, I think. So where we're at with CTI, I think we covered last time I was presenting to task force about year 1 progress, and I've got the list of the projects there on the next slide. I'll ask Taylor probably for help on that one too. But in short, the deadline for year 2, if you will, of CTI is the LOI period closes on the 5th, and then we'll start reviewing those LOIs and then move towards encouraging some for full proposal and trying to move ahead with year 2 funding in the fall. Also, some of the work out of here has been great. Also, not even so taking the initiative to the national level, which is great, but also these increased international collaborations. And I gotta thank Don and Quay and others who've really been moving that ball. I know we have an additional writing workshop, Don, right, coming up end of next month, I think is right when that's coming. I don't know if you want to touch on that at all, Don, the goal of that.
Sure. We had a workshop that Pisces, the Pacific, I don't even know what the I stand for, but it's the West Coast Pacific group of countries that share common goals and such in the marine environment. It's the counterpart to ICES, which is the International Council for Exploration of the Seas. But they had some funds and organized a workshop about control, bloom control, specifically about bloom control, and specifically about activities that had reached the scale where they were now at least into big mesocosms, but even more, preferably open waters. And so we brought in people from Japan and China and other places. 2 things emerged from that. I had written a paper over 30 years ago now. It was a commentary in Nature about, it's called Turning Back the Harmful Red Tide. And it was just about why is our field so far behind in bloom control science when it was actually making such great progress in so many other areas, like detecting cells and toxins and modeling and so forth. And so we used that paper as a bit of a guide for the workshop. And part of the decision was made that we will write an update to that, a short update, sort of status report, but that we also felt it was important to have a much more extensive review of all of the technologies that are out there, and very much unbiased, just really tell people what's possible and get all those references to the right papers and so forth. And that is going to happen at this workshop that Kevin mentioned in February at a very remote place that Vera Trainer has set up out on the ocean in the state of Washington. It's like a 4-hour drive from Seattle, and what everyone says, it's likely to rain every day. So the perfect place perhaps to do writing, get a small group together. And I think the effort will be to write the bigger paper, consider it sort of a white paper on bloom control, and then with a little bit of time, look at the idea of a small commentary with a smaller group of people. But the idea is to really help the field move forward with quite a bit of brainstorming. There will be sections in these papers, especially the larger one, about all this regulatory work that we're talking about and we're running up against. I did want Kevin to make one comment as you thought about that slide with all of the blue dots. Can you go back to that? Yeah, what I've found, as our team has found in trying to navigate this amazingly difficult landscape, is that down in that bottom left corner, that EPA, the FIFRA, and the experimental use permit, and then that arrow that goes over to a FIFRA pesticide registration. Many of us in this that are funded through that initiative are moving ahead and trying these different products, and they have different active ingredients and so forth. But I don't think very many are aware of really what is needed. Yes, we can probably very readily get that AUP, the experimental use permit. You need to do an application for that, but it's still limited to an acre. It may even be limited to an acre in total, so that if you tried to do several treatments with the same material, you have to maybe cumulatively only treat an acre. But in our group, we've realized that we could be going ahead doing all this work and not recognizing how much time and effort it's going to take for that little horizontal area to get a product that could actually get out into natural waters. In other words, you could do all the great work and have this works, and the state of Florida says, okay, we got to bloom, do it. And then someone says, well, no, you need a registered product. And you could even say, well, wait a minute, clay has been registered by so-and-so for some sort of use. But what we've learned is that if you've got a formulation that has 2 or 3 elements in it, each one of those needs to be brought together again, even if they were approved before for some other product. Like a lot of freshwater algicides have some of the oxidants in them that we are trying to use on the marine side. But the fact that you have a formulation with clay and that oxidant and maybe one other ingredient means that all of those need to go through approval. You have to identify which ones are active ingredients, which ones aren't. And that could, we've heard, take thousands, even hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of dollars, and a long period of time to get that approval. And some of the impact studies that we've been doing, they may help in that process, but we may then be asked by the EPA to have this done, the same sort of work done by licensed EPA laboratories, which again is a cost and repeats some of the things that we've done. So we're putting a lot of focus down in that lower corner right now, trying to look ahead, trying to say, okay, we may get asked someday to go do a treatment in wherever, Sarasota Bay. And that's when the EPA will say, well, wait a minute, you need a registered product with a label. And so I think it's real important that we, and my view is, we try to figure out which of the ingredients we're looking at might have the easiest pathway to get to that registration, because there may be something that's more effective, but it might bring in 2 or 3 years of testing and a lot of money, whereas we lower our standards a little bit and have something that doesn't work quite as well but has an easier pathway. That might be a much better way to go. So anyway, that's just a small comment on this this landscape that as I said is really quite challenging.
Thanks, Don. Well said.
Kevin, this is Felix. Can I follow up? Can I follow up, Don, real quick? And apologies for my camera. I don't know if you can. I see it really blurry. I don't know if you can see me or not. Yeah, I just want to follow up, Don, real quick, because I think this workshop that's going to happen, the writing workshop, and the outcome of that is going to be really important at the incubator. Originally, we had the thought of the clearinghouse as part of the incubator, but I think it's become, pretty important as we have moved forward that the clearinghouse is going to have to be a much bigger thing than we originally thought. Because, at the beginning, we thought it would be more of just like a place where you can go, okay, what kind of treatment are there, which ones you can use and where. But I think that we need to really focus on building that so that a lot of this information, like Don was talking about, in terms of like what needs to be done at every step and which agency and what are, it's really critical in developing new methodologies and even using things that we think are actually workable solutions right now. So we're hoping that at some point after this writing workshop, we can follow up with a similar, that one, not a similar effort, but something we can do here that will be US based rather than international, and have that be the beginnings of the clearinghouse in terms of being a source of information for all this like steps. Because I was looking at that diagram and all the arrows are the same size, but the arrows don't really represent the effort that it takes to move from one box to another. So yeah, I think this is something that we need to really work on as we move forward with controls.
Thanks, Felix. Yeah, that could be a hell of a spaghetti diagram. I think we could, and it needs to be done. We have to unravel some of that and see where we can assist from a CTI. And sorry, Kate, I'm taking probably way over my time. Taylor, was there anything else on that? I guess we did have a focus point, right, for CTI this go around, but that was maybe the only thing I missed. We're trying to get additional assistance from West Coast folks. So we highly trying to, for this LOI and RFP, Pseudonychia and Alexandrium on the West Coast. So you might see those, but still open to any and all calls for proposals this round. Here's the funds slide for the first year project funded. You can see kind of a similar mix from the initiative of different tools and technologies. I don't want to waste too much time. We can provide more information if anyone's interested on that. And here, I had this just as a placeholder for conversation if any of the task force was interested to see also that the technologies coming out of both the incubator and initiative are blending over into the innovative HAB program with DEP, lots of conversations with them. We look forward to continued collaboration, proof of concept stuff, and sharing all our technologies from blue, green to red and back and forth. More information, I'll defer to others with DEP. But that's it for me. I took way over my time. Thanks everybody for chiming in. It takes a village to unravel some of this stuff.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, everyone. Do we have any questions or comments for Kevin? Don, I see you raising a hand. You're on mute if you're talking.
Okay, Kevin, I have heard, I think you say that you've been talking with the state legislature about an extension of the program, the initiative, and it sounded like maybe you're getting 2 more years. Can you give us an update?
Sure. Yes, thanks. We have worked with, so let me back up, I guess. We heard from a lot of folks they wanted to continue with that monitoring and that field testing component, which we're now getting into in year 6. You can see that would want to continue some of that and continue to move some of the technologies along. So crafted some legislation for 2 more years, extension of the initiative, a little less funding, but really hyper-focused on field deployment monitoring. And so I think it's gone through 1 Senate stop committee, and I think it's moving to the 2nd. So it's making progress. So far, so good. I don't know if anybody else has any other update on the legislation. I think that's the last I heard. It's got a few more stops as we're about midway through session.
Barb?
Yeah, hi, Kevin. When you say you've heard some folks that heard from folks that they want to keep the program going. Have you had any formal like town halls or listening sessions to really gather local feedback on these issues and where the communities want you to go?
Great perspective, Barb. We had a panel at the workshop, which I really appreciated. I think we had Pinellas County, Sarasota, City of Sarasota, blanking. I think Collier County,
Charlotte.
Yeah, it was a good mix of folks, and they got to chime in both from a need and how to do business and procurement processes and those types of things. So I'd really like to expand that. They even offered up canals and different, hey, some easy ways for access of testing some of the things. So they seem interested. I think definitely we have work to do there with that, of socializing that, getting them comfortable, getting it out to their constituents. So anything welcomed, but that's probably a big task for the coming year. We've talked during the workshop, okay, now someone's standing on your seawall or a boat spraying something. We got to make sure that people are aware of what's going on. And costs, Barb, too. That's, hey, fitting these into cities or county budgets, if that's the direction, rather than a state-funded grant program all the time. That's yet to be seen.
Right. Thank you.
I had a question maybe for Taylor, and just kind of appreciating the changing landscape or seascape as this evolves, and thinking about that balance between the state and federal regulations and kind of navigating that landscape. Are there other states that are kind of rising to the top as priorities, or is the goal with the incubator to kind of focus broadly? Just kind of interested on if there's a strategy for that.
Yeah, so we're still in the initial steps, and so the funding has mainly focused on tier 1, tier 2 research projects. But so we're no specific state has risen as this is a problem. It's mainly as Florida, as Kevin is trying to move these projects along into tier 4, that we're realizing how much approval we need and from how many federal and how many state agencies. So for the clearinghouse, we're hoping to make it somewhat universal. We can't focus on every single control method in every single state approval, but as a general guidelines, everybody you need approval from in order for it to move along and be able to use it.
Thanks so much. Again, it's a difficult process to navigate through, and we appreciate these updates, diving into the complexity, some of the challenges, but also some of the successes along the way. Any other questions for our group? All right, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Felix, and thank you, Taylor, for joining us today. So with that, we are going to move into some of our presentations from recipients of the last HAB grants call. And so we have Dr. Yonggang Liu and we have Dr. Krista Court. We'll start out with Dr. Liu. He currently serves as the director of the Ocean Circulation Lab at the University of South Florida's College of Marine Science. He's a physical oceanographer, but he's very interested in biophysical processes and has been working on Crania brevis for a long time. And I will flip it over to you, Yonggang. Good morning.
Thank you, Kate.
Thanks for joining us.
Screen.
Yeah.
So you see my screen now. I try to play this video. Okay. Okay. Yeah, we received this small project from FDRI to develop a physical biological model for the red tide in Florida. This is an 18-month project, 1 year so far. Our report what have been what kind of progress we've made. The Ocean Circulation Lab I'm leading right now has been doing this coordinated ocean observing and modeling effort on the Western Shelf, with focus on the central part of Western Shelf. The observing component, including array of moorings, both real-time moorings and the subsurface mooring, collect water properties in the water column. This is combined with ocean circulation model. It's a very high resolution, and it's an unstructured grid model. FECON application. FECON, probably some of you may not know, is the finite volume coastal ocean model that is widely used in the coastal ocean modeling community. So we use the forcing field from the NOAA 9 model and open boundary from HICON, and including realistic river flow from USGS. The purpose is try to provide a realistic simulation of the ocean condition on the Western Shelf. We've been doing this for a long time. The model has been set up for more than 10 years now. A lot of test improvements have been done over the last more than 10 years. It's not something new. We consider this an established model. Okay, this is just a simple case demonstrate 2 years ago, Hurricane Ian case. Our model successfully predict this hurricane landfall location and associated water level changes on the Western Shelf. You see that our model successfully predict 3 days in advance the hurricane storm surge locations, strong positive water level and a negative water level to the north for this region. While NOAA predicts 3 days in advance that hurricane would make landfall in our region. So our model provides better information than NOAA's advisory product. And this is my favorite slide I want to show. I know this a little bit, we don't have a lot of time, but this really demonstrates that excellent performance of our model. What I left is to show the map of ocean currents and overlap on salinity field from nowcast forecast product, our model for the Charlotte Harbor region. And to the right is satellite images, independent data. We show that 3 days after Hurricane Ian, these coastal plumes, turbidity plumes flow out of Charlotte Harbor region. And this is well captured by our model in this area. Even the small plume to the south here of the Charlotte Harbor region were captured. And more importantly, if I show a movie of hourly maps, it's not just a simple satellite image should provide a snapshot. Our model can provide more details about this highly dynamic system in the coastal region. You will do this control those red tide control study, try to control red tide bloom. You need to know this coastal information accurately. Yeah, our model could be very useful. And we have been updating this model to a newer version of source code, and also but this newer version, the advantage is it has a general ecosystem model we can build on for more realistic biological applications. And this newer version of WFCON has much higher resolution in the central part of Florida and also South Florida coastal area. For example, in Charlotte Harbor region, Estuary Bay was not in the previous older version model. It's now here including this model. This WFCON has been used for trajectory, more basic physical oceanography-based trajectory forecast product. It's by taking the cell count from FLC, and we update this trajectory forecast product every day and provide 3.5-day forecasts in the future to see where to go. But this product is purely based on physical oceanography, not much biological information. We assume that the model is just a particles, passive particles. There's some level of concentration of red tide associated, but that is not really a biological model. And even those simple models have been widely used and been a lot of provide useful information. It's been used during the last spring break season. The daily users was 4,000 users who clicked our online product. We that's been monitored by our Google free service Google Analytics, and hourly users could be more than 400 users. And so in this project, the project goals and objectives are to develop a more complicated biological model to simulate the red tide on the western shelf based on the FECON source code. And we coupled the established physical model to the biological model within the frameworks of the WFCON, West Florida Coastal Ocean Circulation Model. And we're going to apply this model to extend the initiation, development, and termination process of 2018 events, the bloom events. And also we'll use physical model and the physical biological model to conduct a preliminary examination of 2021 red tide bloom events. The last objective would be to test the coupled model in an event response if there is one during the project period. So what we did, so we coupled this biological module to our existing FECON, the physical model. So this part, the left part, top part shows the flow chart of WFCON. We have wind, heat flux, nesting, tidal, and the river inflow for the as input for the ocean circulation model. And the ocean circulation model information will be used to drive this biological model, which is based on the generalized ecosystem model of FECON source code. And to the right, you can see the more details of this. This is a complicated model. It's including 11 functional groups. We have you have nutrients and phytoplankton, 2 species, this time diatom and carnivorous are assumed. And also there's zooplankton and bacterial detritus and down. It's a bit complicated, but we were able to get the model coupled and run, at least as model run successfully on our high performance computing nodes and also our local computer. We have done several experiments here by using either the cells initiated from offshore, as shown in the center of the this plot, and also separately we examined the initiation from the onshore existing cells. We did this experiment separately, and also a combined case. We found that combined with both offshore and nearshore location initial cells, we have a better comparison model data comparison in terms of the patterns and the high concentration of cell counts. This is the nearshore part of this initial condition we derived from observations on August 15th from just interpolation and also limited the location to the very near coast area. So the other initial conditions for different nutrients and phytoplankton, zooplankton stuff, we at least in this table. I don't want to read every piece. And this, along with other parameters for this biological model, we got all those from the previous publications by Jiang Wash group. Jiang Wash retired 2 or 3 years ago. a while ago, and we based on those. They have a biological model based on ocean circulation provided by our group at the time, and that model has been retired now. Yeah, this is the old. Now we started with the FECON source code of generalized ecosystem model, but we take all the knowledge about this parameter choice biology from the previous publications. This is the result for the combined offshore and nearshore initiation cells. The experiment about 1 month after the initiation. The model started from August 15th. Now this left figure shows the plume pattern on September 17th. That's about a month. You can see that the plume had been elevated to the coast and also down south, hug the coast. The pattern, the higher concentration along the coast. Not exactly it's the same place as you observed, but general patterns are there. And this another 2 weeks later, that's October 1st. That's a red map shows the similar patterns. It seems as the more a little bit down south in the more higher concentration down elevated to the south of Sandy Bay Island. And this figure shows a very rough comparison between the model plume patterns with those MODIS-derived fluorescent light heights, which we found from a publication of Dr. Chuan-Min Hu's lab. So I made this satellite image smaller, about approximate location to this pattern. You can see, well, because these two maps show different things, not exactly the Carinavirus concentration, but the plume patterns are generally there. And this movie shows the elevation of this plume patterns over time on the Western Shelf. Basically, you know that the offshore plume has been elevated to the coast, also transported down south. Because this movie shows the later part of the starting from later part of the plume. It shows part of the termination processes. What we see from this simulation, the features are consistent with our previous publications about the development and termination process of this plume. Future work, we'll have half a year left on this. It's 18-month project. We have this is about a year now. We have a half a year to go. We will report this preliminary result in the ocean science meeting next month, and we will do more experiments, apply the coupled physical biological model to the 2020 plume initiation event, try to see if we can reproduce that. And we will use physical model, the ocean circulation model, to simulate the 2021 event to examine the elevation and connectivity of the Carinavirus cells, and by you also use observation from IFCBs. And then the last one would be to test the coupled model using the historical data or in an event response if there is one. Thank you. That's all I report today. Questions and comments are welcome. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks so much for that overview. Any questions for Yonggang? Don?
Hi, Yonggang.
Hi, Don.
I just wonder if you mentioned zooplankton, bacteria, and so forth, but those are all being determined by the model, right? You're not imposing any of that, right? You have, so tell me about your initial conditions. Your initial conditions are observed Karenia cells from the FWC monitoring, or I mean, how do you start this off, and what levels of zooplankton and bacteria and so forth do you start with also?
Good question. This is really the preliminary simulation. We try to demonstrate whether the model can be used to show at least basic process of physical transport and also the growth and decay process of this coronavirus event. So the initial condition we use, most of them are taken from the knowledge from the previous publications. For example, regarding how much nutrients in the model or set up in the model, and the initial concentrations, all hypothesized, very rough estimate. That's our best guess. But the initial condition of cell counts from the coastal patches part, we derived that from the observations, cell count data, and we convert that cell count, the unit of cells per million cells per liter, to those model used more carbon-based concentration. Yeah, but using case the help from Kate Hubbard's group, try to make it consistent how we can convert for model use and also convert back for comparison. Most of the initial condition and the parameters we took from the previous publication, initial conditions, and the bacteria and those stuff. Really, just we use what the best information from previous publication, and I just put it in the model, see the model run or not. There's a lot of room for improvement in the future, and also for the process oriented study would be necessary in the future. How better understand this complicated biological process.
Yeah, one thing I'd suggest is a sensitivity analysis to see if it really matters whether your bacteria are level A or B or C, and the same thing for zooplankton. In the model we have for the Gulf of Maine, we chose not to try to simulate zooplankton populations directly, with I mean, if you think about it, think of all the different life history stages that you'd have to put into a model, and each of them with different grazing rates on Karenia, and then each one with a rate that's going to vary on what other phytoplankton are present along with Karenia. And so, but you do need a mortality event in the model, otherwise it blows up. So we took this simplistic approach of, first of all, trying it was just 10% per day. It was like, that's our loss rate from whatever, certainly zooplankton, but whatever. And that did a pretty good job. And then we found, though, that we had to turn it into a temperature dependent 10%, or, like a Q10 function. But that was still very, very simple, but it did allow us to stop some of the blooms at the right time and in the right place. So, and anyway, just remember that sometimes a very simple approach can get you a lot in these kind of models, and that the more complicated you get by bringing in all these other like zooplankton bacteria, you can turn a lot of buttons and get it to work, but it's not clear it's reality. And
that's great.
I mean, it's great that you're working on this. I think it's a good thing. But at some point, think of simplifying.
Thank you, Tom.
And if I can just kind of add in, I think one of the goals is to build in complexity, but with targeted experiments to do just that, to kind of see what the importance of changing grazing, other loss factors might be. We're hoping to also build in more realistic measurements from in situ data for things like growth and vertical migration. I also will just mention there are some other ongoing efforts that are also trying to parameterize some of the different components that could potentially help going forward. Cindy Heil's EcoHab project is looking a lot at loss factors related to termination, and so we may be able to get some additional rates and examples to use there. There's also a new project that's being led by NOAA AOML to look at multi-stressors, and through that there's a lot of trophic modeling. So there may be some ability to kind of hybridize some of these efforts going forward and come up with some additional metrics for parameterization. But it's a really good point, and I think the goal is to keep things as simple as possible and migrate away from using 20 to 30 state variables, which as we think about trying to translate that into observations, we have to be mindful of what's sustainable and realistic. Any other questions for Yonggang? Okay. So rather than, we're a little bit off schedule. So rather than try to squish Krista in before the public comment period, I am going to recommend that we go to break. And then we'll come right back at 10:45 with public comment. And then after public comment, we'll have Krista's presentation, if that's okay with everyone. Great. So I'll see you back, let's say 10:44. Thanks, everyone.
Will Lyons
is now joining.
All right, everyone, welcome back. The time is 10:45 and we are in our public comment period. Megan, if you can assist me, I know that we can receive public comments via the website, but also through the call-in number that we've posted here. Megan, do we have any public callers or comments?
We have a 773 number. I will unmute their mic now and you can hold on. If you've dialed in from a 773 area code for public comment, you should be able to unmute. A 773 number. I will
Good
unmute
morning,
their mic now.
everyone.
And you can.
My name is Will Lyons, and I'm a PhD candidate at Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University in Tallahassee, Florida.
If you've dialed in from a 773
Can you all hear me?
area code for public comment, you should be able to unmute. 773 number. I will unmute their mic now. And you can.
My name is Will Lyons, and I'm a PhD candidate at Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University in Tallahassee, Florida.
If you've dialed in from a 773
Can you all hear me?
area code for public comment, you should be able to unmute.
If you have audio coming through a computer, you might want to mute it. I think we're hearing audio
I'm
from
sorry
both
about
the
that.
phone. Oh, that's perfect. Great.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for taking my call. Again, my name is Will Lyons, and I'm a PhD candidate at Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University in Tallahassee, Florida. Thank you for taking my call. I had a question for, I believe, Emily Cooley. I wanted to know, how are the elderly populations in these HAB-prone areas involved in ongoing research? And also, have these vulnerable populations shown increased interest after the onset of COVID?
And thank you for those questions. Just as a reminder, this is a comment period, and so we will document those comments, and but we will not have a direct Q&A as part of this.
Thank you.
Thank you. We really appreciate you calling in. Any other comments?
Will Lyons.
Thank you.
Is now exiting.
I don't see any more, so I will take down the slide and let you move on with your next part of the meeting.
And if we get any more, we can pause after Krista's presentation. But let's proceed, and let me introduce Dr. Krista Court from the University of Florida. She's an assistant professor of regional economics in the Food and Resources Economics Department, and she also directs the Economic Impact Analysis Program. And Krista, I'll turn it over to you to give an update on your project.
All right, thank you, Kate. Let me get things pulled up real quick. Okay, as Kate mentioned, and as the previous awardee was able to do, we just wanted to give a very brief update on progress, but I'll also overview for anyone who's not familiar what the overall goal and the objectives of our project were. And then it's a very big team, and we're trying to package a lot of things into this 18-month project. So then I'll step through by objective and discuss the progress to date and then what we're working on in the future. As I mentioned, it's quite a large team. I'm directing the project. I have several folks under me at the Economic Impact Analysis Program. Dr. Sherry Chow is our resident expert on WebGIS. So we've got her involved in trying to visualize some of these things that we're putting together. 2 graduate students and our research coordinator, Kelsey McDade. We have collaborators with Florida Sea Grant. Andrew Opicki is also here in the Food and Resource Economics Department with me. He specializes in marine economics, and Lisa Krimsky is our regional specialized agent on water quality. Kevin Ash is our collaborator from the Department of Geography, and then we have several folks with the UF-IFAS Center for Public Issues Education, or the PI Center, Ricky Telg, Angie Lindsay, and Sandra Anderson. And we have a new member there, Claire Mitchell, that I haven't been able to add her picture to the slide yet. And then also we are collaborating with Texas A&M University, Corpus Christi, the Heart Research Institute. Kara Coffey does provide some insights from outside of Florida, but on this idea of vulnerability and resilience to red tide. And I'll also mention, they're no longer with us, but we did have Jawada Saba was a PhD student working under Kevin Ash. Bijeta Saha was a postdoc, and Joao Ferreira was also a research assistant professor, and they have moved on to other things in our project period, but I wanted to acknowledge that they had contributions to the effort as well. Our project scope, our overall goal was to create what we're calling the Composite Red Tide Vulnerability Index, or CRTVI, if you see that acronym throughout this presentation, for coastal communities in Florida, and to develop a transferable framework to inform national scale efforts for measuring community vulnerability to the impacts of red tide events. So I specialize in regional economics and economic impacts. So we're specifically looking at vulnerability in the sense of socioeconomic vulnerability, which will include some measure of exposure that I'll get to later. But the project is not trying to advance our understanding of those socioeconomic impacts necessarily, but to gather information that are indicators of what we already know about socioeconomic impacts of red tide events. So it's a slightly different type of project for us. What we wanted to do is provide accurate and defensible estimates of county level vulnerability to the impacts of red tide events. Use this CRTVI as an objective criterion in informed decision making that's related to red tide, and then inform national scale efforts for measuring that community vulnerability to the socioeconomic impacts of red tide specifically. Under that, we had 4 objective areas. So the first one was to identify consistent comparable indicators of the impacts of red tide events. So we had 2 major efforts here. One of them was an exhaustive literature review, and then the second was to develop what was initially a potential list of metrics that could be used in a lot of the communications work that we're doing under Objective 4 to get some feedback, so that we here in Gainesville or in Corpus Christi aren't the ones deciding on exactly what metrics should be included here, but that we're gathering that input both from the communities and the different areas of expertise. And then settle on a final list of metrics that can go forward into Objective 2. So we have completed what we call a scoping literature review, where we have about 180 plus items that we found where it is journal articles, other academic literature, maybe theses or PhD dissertations, and as well as gray literature. So things that are coming out of government agencies or nonprofit organizations that are specifically related to socioeconomic impacts of red tide events. And then we began a little more formalized effort, a systematic literature review with the UF library system to make sure that we didn't miss anything. And so that effort is still ongoing. As far as the metrics go, in that process that I talked about where we were gathering input from the Objectives 2 and 4 teams, we've selected 48 metrics at this point across 4 domains, and those domains are tourism, fisheries and marine activity, human health, and just broadly socioeconomic vulnerability, and then supported the data collection efforts of those metrics for Objective 2. And you can see there at the bottom, our planned deliverables here for this objectives is an annotated bibliography or a documentation of all of that literature that we found, and then documented justification of those selected metrics for inclusion within the CRTVI. Objective 2 was to sort of put all of those metrics together in the vulnerability index vulnerability index framework that quantifies vulnerability of communities to specifically those socioeconomic impacts of red tide. So I mentioned at this point, we've got county level data collected for those 48 metrics across the 4 domains. We've started working on metric scaling. We're using min-max normalization, and what that's doing is just to essentially leveling the playing field on the distribution of those metrics within the counties. And then we're looking now at correlations of those metrics within each domain to identify and minimize any collinearity. So if we happen to have from focus groups or from some of these other communications activities that we're going into a very long list of metrics, and several of those metrics are really communicating the same thing to us, or they are organized or moving in the same direction, then we don't necessarily need to include all of them within the index. So that's the effort that we're working to see if we can narrow that list down a little bit. And then we have 2 aggregation options. So the first and simple way would just be to use a simple average of metrics within each domain and then across the domains where we're using equal weighting. But we also used our communications component of the project to gather some information from, again, the community members and experts in these different fields to have what we're terming an expert-informed weighting derived from those focus groups and input from our advisory committee. And that will give us something more like a weighted average on those different metrics, again, within the different domains and then across the domains as well. The other component here that was important was to design the CRTVI in a way that captures HAB exposure at the county level. So not only indicators of how a county would be impacted, but how often are they impacted by red tide, so that we can combine those 2 things in a measure of vulnerability. So we have used, we've settled on the information that's coming out of Dr. Chuan Min Hu's lab, that optical oceanography laboratory at University of South Florida, to give us county level red tide exposure metrics using that MODIS imagery from 2003 to 2019. At this point, we've calculated using a few different buffer distances from the county land boundaries, because again, looking at socioeconomic activity, most of that activity is taking place inshore or near shore environments. So we wanted to measure exposure in those locations specifically. And you can see some of the maps that we're starting to work with there to identify that measure of exposure to be included within the vulnerability index. So here, planned deliverables are a geodatabase and then technical documentation related to those 48 domains, metrics within the 4 domains, and then the weighted and unweighted versions of the CRTVI. Then objective 3 takes that information and visualizes it so that we can communicate those results to the public and to others that need this type of information to inform decision making related to red tides. So we plan to develop an interactive web platform to visualize and communicate the results that are coming out of objective 1 and 2. We shared 3 different styles of web platforms that are really a menu of options that we could put together with our advisory committee members back in October, and collected opinions on the pros and cons of those different styles and what might work the best. And we've selected the ArcGIS dashboard to be used to develop the web platform because it aligns with and offers the potential for future integration within the existing FWC HAB dashboard. At this point, we've designed a preliminary version of what that graphical user interface might look like on the web platform. Again, based a little bit on that existing FWC HAB dashboard, but also on some feedback that we're getting on, how people would like to be able to interact with the data, not just see our final version of the index, but maybe be able to see and download the data for each of the metrics that are comprising the index as well. And here, the planned deliverables will be that interactive WebGIS platform, as well as technical documentation that goes with it. And our final objective was to develop a communication and outreach program to inform targeted audiences about the CRTVI. So it's always hard when you want to integrate communications throughout the entire project to make them their own objective, because they actually do a lot of things to help us inform those other objective areas as well. So in addition to what that objective sounds like, which will be a communication toolkit at the end of the project, this team has also been helping us with focus groups along the way, so that we're, again, gathering information from the communities and from the different areas of expertise to inform this effort. There were around 20 total participants across 4 focus groups. And they broadly represented those 4 domain groups of interest within and across the focus groups that were implemented. They were all conducted in October of 2023. And the results from those focus groups were informing some of the decisions that we were making in objectives 1 and 2 to design, to select those metrics and to design the CRTVI. And the next step here will be some usability testing. So once we get that web platform developed, working with a few different groups to see, what might be the best way to visualize it, and does it do what we're hoping that it does? We will have designed it in a way that makes sense to us, but when we get users in there, is it intuitive? Are they able to do what they would like to do within it? And if not, we can make some adjustments based on the results of that usability testing. And then I mentioned a communication toolkit. We'll kick off those efforts in March, where we really try to package up everything that we've learned within the project and communicate it out in a way that others can use that toolkit to communicate out to their audiences as well. We'll have documentation of those stakeholder focus groups, including methods, insights, and perspectives, documentation of the usability testing, and then provide a communication and outreach toolkit. And I know we're quite familiar with the work of the HAB communications group, so I expect that we will be working closely with them to make sure that we're following all the recommendations of that group as we put that communication toolkit together as well. Just very quickly, future work. We plan to complete that systematic literature review that I spoke about. We'll update our citation management software, Zotero, to include everything that we find that we may not have found in that initial scoping review. We'll begin an analysis of that systematic literature review results. That the systematic literature review wasn't necessarily a component of the project, but we would like to try to finish that up, but we'll still work on it even if that is not finished up as an output of the project. Objective 2, finalizing those metric definitions, groupings, and weights to be used in the CRTVI. So we did collect information from the advisory committee and from the different focus groups, and now I would like to go back to our team and make sure that we're incorporating our own expertise on how confident we are in some of the data sources of the metrics that are now may have been weighted highly on people that might not, by individuals that might not have an expertise in that data source themselves. So we've got one more round of project team to look at how we would weight those metrics, and then complete that aggregation for the CRTVI with both those equal weighting and expert weighting, and then deliver the GIS files and documentation over to Objective 3 so that we can work on finalizing the metrics and indices to be visualized, discuss the methods and formats used to prepare and transfer the data, because that's really important in how we make those decisions on how we visualize the data, and then process the data, develop the dashboard, make some of those final decisions related to the web GIS features, functionalities, and hosting. And then finally, under that communications objective, analysis and documentation of those focus group results, and then we will kick off the design and implementation of both the usability testing and the communications toolkit. That's everything I prepared.
Thanks so much, Krista. That was great. Let's see if there are any questions for you, Any questions for Krista? I see Quay's hand up. Quay?
Yeah, so I think this is really wonderful what you've done, and it's impressive. So I hate to even say anything, but going back to your list of metrics, there were none to me that seemed to capture the role of tourism in that. And I wonder if that would be, a separate metric, a separate calculation of vulnerability. And so this one is focused on Florida residents, it seems like, more than on the occasional visitors. Because the COPD, for example, you don't know what the rate is in occasional visitors. And when you have what I gather are thousands to people coming to visit, you don't know how some of those things apply to them. That was my first comment. And the second was, there doesn't seem to be any measure in this of how many individuals are close to the coast or work in the marine environment, so their exposure is higher than others. Maybe that's an impossible task, but I was thinking about it from the point of view of either a geographic location or type of job category, but I don't know if that sort of information is even available. And it's kind of late to raise these questions, I realize. So I feel really bad saying that, and I think this is a great start.
So Quay, thank you for mentioning them, because one is a new one and some have come up through our advisory committee, so I can provide some answers to them. So we do have the domain related to tourism, but it would be capturing something much more like how much of the economic activity in the region is supported by tourism. It's not going to capture the example that you gave of maybe the amount of the tourists that are coming in that have some of the human health characteristics that we're looking at in those other domain areas. And I haven't heard anybody mention that until today. So that's actually very interesting. I made a note to see if we can look at that, because some of the data sources that we're using are national level. So we may not capture international visitors, but we do also have some information on the origin of the visitors that come to certain regions or certain counties. So we may be able to put those two things together to try to have some overlap between that tourism domain and the human health domain. So it's definitely worth investigating. On to the other comment, though, we're doing everything at the county level initially, because that's the geographic scope for that all of the metrics are available at. We do have it within the project scope to look and see what we would be able to do at a finer community level, or just maybe looking at the coastal within a few miles of the coast. Some of the data sources are going to allow us to do that, and some are not. But we do, in the county level data, we do have an estimate of marine economic activity. So there is data available at the national scale for the percentage of certain industry sectors that is associated with marine economic activity. And we've been able to put that together with county level, sector level information on employment to at least put an estimate of, how many people are working within these marine sectors, and then assuming that those are taking place near the coast within that county. So we're starting to get at that, but the data are not good enough for us to put all 48 metrics in something at a smaller scale than the county level for now.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Dave?
Yeah, thanks for that overview. It's very good. For objective 3, you were referring to the ArcGIS dashboard. I think several times you referred to it as a FWC dashboard or product, and it's a DEP product. I don't want someone trying to go to FWC's website trying to find this and get very frustrated that you can't find it. So I just want to make that clarification.
Okay, yes, I was referring to the data that was being shown on it, but not who was hosting it. So that's, and I think there's data from both sources anyway, so thank you.
Wait, is your hand back up?
No.
Okay, just checking.
Yeah.
Barb?
Well, I just wanted to say, for the group, I'm on the advisory committee, and I've been most impressed on these weighting exercises. We do them virtually, and we've all been around enough to know in workshops where you do the Post-it note exercise on the wall, and they have successfully done that Post-it note exercise virtually, and I just wanted to give you applaud because I've been on lots of workshops where they have ideas to do these things and it doesn't come off seamlessly. So congratulations.
Thank you, and I will give the credit to my PyCenter colleagues for coming up with how to do that. It was not my idea.
Well, thanks so much, Krista. And with both of our speakers today, I think that it gives sort of a flavor of some of the types of models and analyses that we are building. It's definitely in a capacity building mode, but as we begin to think about adding in different layers of complexity, I think that again we can speak to very specific questions. We can also take a step back and look at more broad questions. And I just really want to thank our speakers today, not just the ones that just presented on their research, but our speakers this morning as well. So many thanks. I just wanted to comment, so we do have one other grant that was funded through the last cycle. This is entitled A Land-Based Shellfish Depuration Mitigation Strategy to Increase Business Opportunities and Reduce Economic Losses Associated with Extended Lease Closures Following Red Tide Exposure. Dana Wetzel at Mote Marine Laboratory is the lead on that, and we are hoping to invite her to a future meeting so that she can present a highlight of where her project is at. Again, we're about 2/3 of the way through these projects, and so we just really appreciate getting these updates and seeing all the hard work. It's been great. Okay. So we are going to switch gears a little bit now, and it was great to see some of the products that we currently have through the grant program. Some of the discussion that we have ahead of us this afternoon is considering that next call for proposals and what that might look like. We have started to lay that out in some of our prior meetings. And we have kind of settled on at least one area to focus on, which is a pretty large topical area, nutrients. It's something that we have mentioned in prior recommendations, and I think it's a great area to continue to evolve. And I would like to ask Megan. Megan has been working hard on providing some of the basic guidance and guidelines for the grant call. And so I thought that would be a great place to start. Based on some of the past meetings that we've had together, we have decided, we've discussed the potential for different potential funding activities. And so that's one of the things that we wanted to decide today. The overall goal with this is to have a discussion and then to determine that priority area language. I'll let Megan explain a little bit more about the timeline where we are. And Megan, maybe I'll turn it over to you. And
sure. Are we comfortable with me sharing what
I would? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I will pull up on the screen that most of you will be familiar with. Some of the newer members may not have participated in the previous HAB grants call, but the last 2 rounds, we have a pretty standard, our Florida Fish and Wildlife Research Institute grants program is pretty established and set. So the main language and the call for proposals. Oh, does Don have a question first?
I'm just wondering whether the speakers and others should still be part of this call if we're starting to talk about future grant possibilities.
No.
And they
can stream it.
So they
won't participate in the conversation, but
they don't have to get off the call.
No, we're under the sunshine, so anybody can listen in, Don.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Don, for the attention. I appreciate it. So the Epteberg Research Institute has the grants program. We've gone through the cycle a couple times, and we established the Harmful Algal Bloom Grant Program, and when we in 2019, when the task force came back together as a mode to fund priorities of the task force. So the language in these applications are pretty standard. They align with our rules, state rules and regulations, but so we won't be reviewing those parts, but I've went through and started. So it's highlighted, and I apologize, it's just to draw attention to it, but this would be a 12-month timeline. So they could be longer project periods. Some of that has to, we do have a capacity to review, because if you recall, we solicit applications, we send them to external peer reviewers, and we go through grants review process with them, and then those recommendations go forward to our FWRI grants committee by rule, who make the final determination with those recommendations in place. So this is possible. It's very aggressive, though. The only fall with a longer timeline is the restrictions on state budget. Essentially, our fiscal year ends June 30th, the new one starts July 1. So when we extend project or review periods, then we talk about 2 years worth of budget and not 1. So this, as we go through the discussion, can be adjusted. It's just what it would look like if it was a 1-year cycle, July 1 through June 30th, the fiscal year 25 cycle, and a 12-month project period. And then what I've done is pulled out from all of our public documents, the HAB Task Force Consensus 1, Consensus 2, letters, meeting notes, anything that has been publicly spoken and mentioned of the task force related to the priorities of nutrients, since you identified those were where you wanted to start. And part of the discussion was, rather than jumping into research, maybe a state of the science, apologies for my scrolling, a state of the science start would be a better way to go. So this next section is what, for your discussion of what you might want to include in a call. And you see I've broken it out into 2, starting because, state of the science precedes research. This is the captures from the meetings that we've heard in terms of what you might want to capture in the state of science symposium, and then the research stream, which could follow that. These are all the identified nutrient priorities, pretty broad, but that have been, as I mentioned, published in your past priority documents. So I will actively type as you discuss, but I will let Kate lead that conversation. So the idea, though, is that we'd want to leave with a pretty strong understanding of what you'd like to see in the call to address the next priority area in the HAB grants call for the task force to put out this spring for projects that would be funded for the next fiscal year.
Thanks so much, Megan. And I can just kind of lay out a little bit more for the sake of discussion. So we have these sort of two different streams, and one is more trying to get an assessment of where we're at right now, and that is the state of the science stream. The other is the research stream, and that is to fund novel research. I think that when we've had prior discussions, and considering the scope of this funding and the scale of some of the different nutrient questions, I think that it was helpful to consider these possible areas. In terms of where we go next for discussion, we can solicit requests for proposals from both streams. We can prioritize one stream over the other. There's a fair amount of flexibility in terms of how we move forward and how we prioritize. And so I think that that's a good starting place to see if members of the task force want to see this go forward with these two separate streams, or if we want to try to focus in on one, and which of those that would be in that case. So are there any comments or thoughts as to particular streams to focus on? I see Barb's hand went up first, I think. Barb?
Yeah, a couple of questions. One is just to clarify, we're talking specifically about Carenia.
Yes, this is still related to Carenia and nutrients.
Just want to make sure we're on the same page. And the second one, when we excuse me, when we talk about one or both of them, do we know what kind of funding we have available, or what a ballpark is?
Yeah, so we've kind of laid out a few different options there. The idea with these being 12 to 15 month projects, trying to aim for a budget that is around $200,000 or less seems to make sense for an individual project. That also is something that can be a little bit flexible. I think that we would hope to fund, again, 3 projects at that scale. However, it is up to us if we wanted to try to fund a larger project. The issue really becomes the ties to state funding. So because we don't have rollover from one fiscal year to the next, it makes us hard to fund a large dollar project in a single year and ensure that it meets all of its demands. Dwayne, I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, I just want to share a thought. I apologize, but I've got an 11:30 hard stop, so I'm going to weigh in. I think having both of these streams concurrently issued is of value, mainly because there may be some overlapping interests, and whoever wins stream 1 versus stream 2, our guidance should be that they should be coordinating at some point. But I want to make this comment just to throw it out for thought. In 2026 will be 5 years since we've been convened. And having kind of this roll up on red tide between what do we know and then what are not just in general the research gaps, but the priority areas for research moving forward. If that was assembled, into a single kind of large umbrella symposium that also integrated the working group effort, which we should have a draft sometime in spring. You've got a lot of content for, I think, a very significant red tide symposium for Florida. So I just, the timing is a little tricky, but if you're looking at a year to 15 or 18 months to get these two, lines of work done, then I would use the symposium to bring it all together in our 5th year. And let's do a statewide symposium that brings it all together, and it will be a good message to the Florida legislature and the governor about what have we done in the last 5 years and where's the value add. So that's my two cents.
And I think those are great points. I don't think that these things necessarily need to be the same effort. And I think that one of the comments, just seeing the presentations that we've had at the last set of task force meetings and recognizing how much progress has been made, I agree we're in a really good place to be able to pull those accomplishments together, highlight those. I like that suggestion of a red tide centric symposium. Again, I don't know that I think that could be something that happens alongside these funding streams, which I think is what you were suggesting, Dwayne. There are some comments coming in through the chat. Could I invite you to please speak? I believe, Sherry, did you want to mention anything?
I'll just give another vote for what Dwayne said. I think there's merits to holding an event. I think we know state of the science type projects have worked well for raising visibility and bringing people together for sort of the next phase and what we plan to do. So I think it's a really strong suggestion.
I will weigh in with just one thought and then I'll flip to Quay. I agree that the accomplishments is a huge priority. I also just want to make sure that the nutrient issues, which are complex and difficult to unravel, I want to make sure they also get their own prioritization. So I just mentioned that, and then I'll flip to Quay.
Well, that's basically what I was going to say as well. I think that while I support the idea of something based on the progress writ large, the people who would work on the nutrient questions, and that needs to be done before the research, I think, because you need to figure out what research really needs to be done on nutrients. I mean, people keep repeating the same kinds of things over and over again. And so how should we move forward? And so I'm hesitant about putting money into more research until we have a clear set of priorities.
Thanks, Quay. That's a really good point. I expect there will be some discussion about that. Let's see, Barb has her hand raised, and so we can maybe come back to that. But Barb?
No, I'm actually kind of dovetailing on what Quay had to say, because I was sitting here thinking and Quay knows probably better than any of the rest of us, there have been some very large projects funded on the nutrient question, and it's still a question. So I'm less supportive of funding research at $200K for a nutrient project than looking at where we are and providing guidance on what are the next steps. Because if the large projects, I'll cite Cindy Heil's EcoHab special issue where I think they came out with 17 possible ways Granny uses nutrients. Am I right, Quay? Something like that.
Something like that. I always forget the number.
Yeah. That I don't know how anyone would move the needle forward on that with a $200K project. So of those 17, where I would say what's the short list, I guess, is what I'm saying. So I'm in favor of the review over research. Thank you.
And just to play devil's advocate, we've heard today from some of our presenters, and especially with modeling in mind, and so thinking about whether or not there's potential to add nutrients in that same sort of space, that could be an applied research topic. Just to give an example of something that's maybe different than going out and measuring nutrients out in the field. Quay?
Well, the current EcoHab has a number of nutrient experts in it. And so I'm hoping they're going to come out with something that is going to be more illuminating. And so I'm not sure how we would devise this to avoid duplicating what they're already doing. And I'm not managing that project, so I have some awareness, but I can't say exactly.
And that's been a concern with other projects along the way as well. And so in order to go through the state procurement process, there has to be a very clear delineation of what is involved in the project that we're funding. And so through that process, that delineation has to be made very clear. So it has to happen at the onset of the project, but we've had to deal with that sort of potential overlap before. And we have another comment from Dwayne, and I'll just read it out loud. I know that he had to jump off, but he said that the nutrient state of the science question could be incorporated into the larger RFP construct, and that he agrees with the concerns that Quay and Barb raised. So it seems like there's some, Quay.
Well, I was just going to comment in response to that. I can't tell if he's saying it should be one workshop with that issue plus the larger issue. I think that it could be two workshops that are different, but within the construct of this RFP.
And so that delineation would then look more like kind of an updated state of the science on red tide, and a sort of more introduction to the state of the science on nutrients and marine and estuarine systems. I think that we had laid out a few different ideas in terms of, we floated workshops, but also white papers can be incredibly important. And there are other potential ways to culminate information that would still potentially fall under this stream. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there as well. Barb, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, well, just a thought, and it might be tricky to schedule, but if we did the nutrient workshop first, so that you could bring forward what was discovered in that into the overall red tide state of the science, might be a little more efficient way to do it, but it would require some coordination.
Other thoughts on whether to have or not to have a workshop focused on state of the science of nutrients? Okay.
I think the magnitude of that first one, the nutrient one, is much smaller than the magnitude of the other one. So it'd be much less costly. But I think they would both need to have a product of some sort. Whether it's a white paper, and how does the South Florida report that is going to come out someday, I hope, feed into a white paper? I think because it was produced by only a few people, it's not sufficient, but it is a start.
Are there other products that people would like to see come from a nutrient state of the science? Barry, I see that you're off mute. Is that an indication that you want to weigh in?
No, sorry, I got kicked out and just logged back on.
Well, welcome back. Yeah, of course. Don, your hand is raised.
Yeah, it's really more on a related topic. It seems to me that if we do this workshop, have to think hard about who's going to participate and make a special effort to bring in some of the people who are on opposite sides. I know Quay's talked about the HAB project or the projects, and they tend to be people that have gotten together with pretty much a common view about the nutrient story. I know in the Gulf of Maine, when we built our big HAB project, I brought in some people that had some strong gadfly tendencies, always questioning everything we said, and that turned out to be really valuable. So I know there's people like Larry Brand, like Brian LaPointe, and others, and I think it would be important to have the selection of the workshop participants be not in the hands of some one person who might choose a team of like-minded people, but to really try to bring in some real opposing views.
That's a good point, Don. I think that that's been a priority with a lot of the prior state of the science activities that have been held. I think that the nature of those, I think that the whole science is evolving as well. So I'd like to think that we're moving towards more a holistic approach for thinking about these things. And certainly I think a workshop would want to be inclusive. In terms of the selection process, I also think it's a good point that while we want to make sure that we represent different expertise throughout Florida, it's also important to make sure that we're looking at the national scale as well, to think about building in some recommendations, both internally and externally, with people that are involved and not involved. So again, I think that's a great point. Well, I think that a state of the science workshop with deliverables for nutrients is where we've landed for one of these funding streams. Is there anyone that wants to voice dissent or propose something different for that? Okay. So just with the idea, I'd like to try to craft some language today, and then we'll go back and craft a more thorough draft for review. For today, we touched upon some of the products, a potential white paper. I think that a blueprint for the future is always really helpful. Are there other ideas about products that might come from this that we would want to build into the RFP?
Whatever it is, given the limited amount of money that's going to be available, it's going to have to be a prioritized list so that we can go back and do the science. It'll also be very helpful for federal funding as well.
And Dave Whiting, Dave?
So I don't see anything in here, whether it's state of the science or research stream, that is kind of explicitly getting at, you know, whether the nutrients are anthropogenic in source or not. And, you know, if we're trying to provide information to change management decisions or inform management decisions, do we want to more explicitly tease out that the goal of some of this is to what is the state of science relative to nutrients from anthropogenic sources and its influence on red tide? And in order to do that, what type of research would be necessary, or what tools need to be improved or used in order to do that well? I mean, that's, to me, isn't what we have here yet, and I think that would be good.
And I think that that raises the question, you know, focusing on marine and estuarine areas is itself challenging. Looking further upstream obviously brings in a whole lot of other questions, challenges. We can scale and start with marine and estuarine and then consider how to build in some more of those upstream components, recognizing that they're going to be really important in the marine environment regardless. We can try to take a more overarching approach. I think that again, it changes the scale a fair amount, potentially the focus. So comments, thoughts on that? You're good.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Quay.
Raise my hand. I agree with you about the problem with the scale, but the whole point of this is to answer the question, is there anything we can do to prevent the blooms? And so I think that there are probably methods that are more likely to be able to answer that question than other methods. And so if we want to focus the research towards answering that question, I think that would be appropriate.
Taking notes and digesting a little bit. So perhaps in the same way, Megan, do you mind scrolling down to the research stream topics? Great. Oh yeah, that's nice. I think that we may be able to pull from some of these to help craft the language for the more workshop oriented theme. So we can potentially pull some of these as the primary questions rather than giving options. We can still give options. None of these explicitly refer to anthropogenic versus oceanic or other natural sources.
I think
They're
D
all,
comes the closest.
and I will be honest, I think that that is on purpose, because it is complex, and as much as we have anthropogenic inputs, if it were as easy as looking at those without considering the whole suite of oceanic contributions as well, we would be in a different place.
This is also very generally written to be HABs, and so it needs to be Karenia. And I'm not sure, given what we know about initiation, that we should be focused on our formation, that we should, or we think we know anyway, we should be focused on that stage, since the impacts and the problems are more at the near shore intensification and maintenance.
I think B and D do a reasonable job of capturing different stages. I don't know if the technology part of it, but I'm thinking more about the latter part of D. So, Megan, what if we take B and D into a separate item and try to chop them a little bit? And for B, it seems like where we're at with the state of science, it would be to identify, monitoring. Oh, sorry, for B. Instead of inform monitoring, I think we would be identifying, monitoring, and maybe implementation of technologies instead of development. And I would say, just to add on to that, and associated data availability. Does, again, with the idea that this will involve a little bit of language evolution to focus on red tide, do members generally feel okay with these general focal areas for the state of the science?
By phrasing it as implementation of technologies, it almost sounds like it's looking for new methods, as, I mean, identify, I guess, is the word that I find there might be methods that are available, or people might come up with something new. But it's the question that it should be the focus, not the how you get there.
I guess I was reading this as if those technologies have already been deployed and are being used, and we're trying to capture what is currently happening.
So this is for the state of the science for nutrients.
Yes.
Not the science part. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think moving some of that language into the state of the science is helpful for providing some guidelines for that request. And we started to go down that path. So I think that it's a separate call to say what technologies could help us better solve our problems. I feel like I'm not sure that comes in this first gathering. But that could be recommendations for implementing new technologies, could be a product. So let's also then scope out some of the products, because I think that gives it gives a little bit more ability to think this through. So we had mentioned obviously the workshop, but I think that there's some other potential products. We had mentioned a white paper. I think going up to some of those prior comments, even Megan, there was, with a workshop, there needs to be an interdisciplinary steering committee. The extent to which that also represents a working group. I think that it would be good to require an interdisciplinary steering committee as part of this. And that would ideally be, I'm not sure, we would have to check, but if that could involve members, or at least one member from each of the HAB task force and the blue-green task force, that might be a way to have some kind of overlap. A plan for a workshop.
So are you thinking this workshop would cover blue-green algae as well as Corynea? I mean, I'm thinking that there's all this stuff with the benthic macroalgae, well, not mostly blue-green algae, cyanobacteria, in marine environments that may be nutrient related too. But then that's expanding the scope of it if it's the nutrient one we're talking about. But certainly nutrients affect that. So I'm a little confused.
I think that we'll still have a marine focus and a Corynea brevis focus. I think that recognizing that we can't ignore the role of upstream nutrients in terms of the questions and the gaps that we currently have, involving the Blue-Green Task Force, but also others working in estuarine spaces. I think that that will be really important. Whether or not this extends to include freshwater, I see that maybe as a second step. But that's, again, one possibility. I saw Barb's hand go up. Barb?
Yeah, just to clarify by saying, you know, a representative of each, I think that's where it started getting messy, that this is still a Kyrenia focused workshop. Yes, we need to have blue-green algae task force represented, but I don't know that it's at a 50-50 representation between the HAB, the Kyrenia task force, and the blue-green. And maybe that can be tweaked.
And that representative member was just, you know, just putting that out there as a, if it's an RFP, having that recommendation. But I don't think that there would be issues with having more members, as long as everyone is compliant with the sunshine. But I think, Barb, that's a very good point, and I think that including freshwater nutrient issues becomes a much more involved workshop. And I'm not saying I don't think that it should happen. I'm just not sure that that's the next step. I think that the ability to continue to focus on Cryonea brevis issues within that space is one that starts to pull in questions related to other phytoplankton, other plankton like those benthic cyanobacteria that are in that sort of weird space between freshwater and marine systems. So I think that there's a role potentially in this workshop space for that sort of discussion. But I think everything ultimately still dials down to a Kyrenia-centric question, at least for this. Just to keep it focused. Does that seem to make sense? Quay, does that?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm having some trouble imagining how this is going to come together, because I'm not sure that the nutrient one needs to be that complicated. With just, you know, no more than say 20 people and maybe a small working group that's going to actually write the documents, as opposed to a steering committee. I mean, I think it could happen pretty quickly. And it's the state of the science for the Kyrenia writ large that requires the major lift in terms of putting together a steering committee and having multiple representation. I mean, I don't think it's bad, even for the nutrients, to have somebody from the Blue-Green Task Force, because obviously they're very focused on nutrients. I don't know. This is getting more complicated than I thought it should be.
The steering committee can be small. I think that it's a good idea to have the steering committee for each.
Yeah,
I think that
definitely.
You know, it can scale appropriately. And I think that also helps just ensure that, kind of going back to Dawn's point, that we're inclusive in terms of who's invited and really thoughtful in that process. I saw Megan's hand go up, I think. Megan?
If you'll invite me to speak, thanks. I appreciate
Yes,
that.
you.
I just want to draw, I mean, we're giving a lot of detail here, but just a reminder that it's a call. So the products will be developed by whoever we think is the best application, you know, however it ranks in terms of the things. So we want to give some guidance into the expectations of what's in it. But in terms of the who's writing the white paper, it's with the team that's submitting the application. So there'll be a chance to evaluate that upon submissions. Thank you.
Well, then, you know, I think the point is to include enough information with the request for proposals that we get that spectrum, you know, of potential projects to address these needs. And I think what we still need to include here is guidance on products, and what that could look like. I will also just say that, again, we'll have a chance to review these before they would be posted. So we'll try to capture our discussion today and, you know, work with the verbiage and give some different options. So let's, you know, again, try to capture main concerns, thoughts, things that we need to add in, and then also areas that are still really not clear or need to be better defined. Okay.
So under products, I think there needs to be something that says unresolved questions and a prioritized list of unresolved questions. But you have to have unresolved questions about what, and the what is the role of nutrients in promoting Corynea brevis blooms and their sources. So this group isn't going to tell you what those sources are. They're just going to say, this is what we don't know. And perhaps with some guidance about how to get there. Yeah.
And I think that recognizing some of the efforts of the assessment, and I'm not sure if that needs to be explicitly mentioned in the call, but I think that will be an important part of this, as others have already raised. I think, Barb, Clay, is your hand still up from before?
No.
Okay. Barb?
Yeah, so I would like to see or suggest that it's really two products. One is a science-based, I can't think of a better way to say it, but the other one is that they work with the communications working group to provide a, whether it be a, what do I want to say, overview or some sort of synthesis that would be easily understood by the lay public.
I think that's a super point. You know, to coin, Krista mentioned her communications toolkit, and I think that would be major to see coming from this. I think that could be a product of something that could be addressed both in the workshop and in the specific products. Other potential products or conceptual things that should be built in. Okay, so I think this gives us a really good starting place for the RFP for a nutrient-centric state of the science, potentially workshop-oriented proposal or call for proposals. And I think that that is something that, you know, with the idea of potentially funding one or multiple projects within this space, I think that that's also still a possibility. I know that the other idea that was raised is the need to have more of a red tide revisitation of the state of the science. And a question for folks is whether or not that fits into this particular upcoming funding call or not. I think that what we've heard today is that that is a major effort and that it would require some capacity building just to pull it off. And it would likely need to be planned, you know, fairly extensively with a large community. Looking ahead to 2026, which was thrown out as a potential date. What are the thoughts about including language for that? Again, with the idea that it's potentially capacity building for something that's in the future as part of this call, or potentially working on that separately. I know that I have mentioned in the past there had been some momentum to try to have a Florida HAB symposium. This was sort of pre-COVID. It never re-energized. I'm not sure if that would be kind of an opportunity to think about reinvigorating that effort, or if, again, the idea is really to keep this focused on Carnea brevis and accomplishments over the last 5 to 10 years. So I guess those are a lot of questions out there, but taking a step back, do we want to try to include something for a more red tide centric overview of accomplishments in this funding call? Dave?
I would say that that's a separate effort, that I wouldn't try to build it into this one, that this is enough and that would be too much.
Okay.
Did you call me?
Yes.
I can't imagine that you would fund more than one workshop, unless, and I can't, it would seem to me that for the nutrient part, or one group to do all of those things, it would be very hard to divide them into two separate groups. So in my mind, that's might be multiple proposals, but only one funded project. And I guess I would ask the others, perhaps Sherry, you know the answer to this question, what the other state of the science symposia cost. And they seem to have been organized within a year. So it would be doable within a year. I guess it's a question I'm asking.
And I think that the organization versus the maturity of the different efforts, having chance to have some of the currently funded projects wrap up, there's some questions about timing in there.
Yeah.
But I think Sherry might be able to speak to the cost of the symposium. So a workshop for nutrient, symposium for sort of the overarching meeting, if we can all be on the same.
Oh, the
No?
overarching meeting, yes. No, never mind. The overarching meeting, yeah.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it would depend on how many people, obviously. I mean, I think a small, I'll say small group of 30 maybe could fit in a smaller venue with a smaller audience. And that is the really ballpark here, thinking that folks are within travel distance. Where you have it matters. Can you get space for free or not? Would be less than 40. But, you know, once you get into something bigger and maybe more visible and spaces for audience, and you start doubling that size, you know, there's venues that go for around 50 to 80 people. If you go much bigger than that, it gets kind of expensive, gets more expensive because you need a bigger room and costs start to escalate from there. So it really sort of depends on how many people you think might come and where they are traveling from. And if you kind of want that open bit to invite, you know, students of faculty members, and not just researchers, but even if you say researchers, they could have labs and teams where they would really want their whole team to be present to have those conversations. It's sort of a different beast if you're around 40 people versus when you start getting close to 100 or 150. But I you know, with 200 to do a whole event and the write-up, that is plenty of money.
So kind of going back to the timing, I think that we may still be able, Megan, what would it be like if we had 2 calls but have them separate? Is that, we might have to discuss the feasibility of having them be separate.
Sorry, in this time frame, I'd have to also discuss it through the FWI Grants Committee, since they're by rule, who the governing body is. So, you know, I've only proposed to them as one call like we've done in the past and in the timeline, so I'd have to run it by them.
Just thinking if we're planning ahead to a 2026 Data of the Science Symposium for the whole sort of red tide part, that may or may not be needed to be advertised in April. So let's we'll work through some of the different timelines and options, and then we'll also share some language. I think that it sounds like we are fairly comfortable with putting out a request for proposals related to a nutrient workshop and products surrounding that. I think the bigger question of a red tide centric symposium is one that's important to discuss and to plan for. I just, again, want to kind of go backwards in time and think about fiscal years and see when and how that might be best advertised and kind of put into place. But again, recognizing that that is a big priority, and I think there's the potential for there to be some co-sponsorship there as well. Clay, I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, I liked your idea, which we sort of dropped, for starting a Florida HAB symposium, sort of like the Northeast HAB symposium. For those, I think most of you all on here are familiar with the fact that what started out as technical advisory groups for specific grants has turned into a much larger and very successful Northeast HAB symposium that discusses all HABs and includes managers, and that managers are highly engaged in it, and sometimes the public as well. And whether that's something that you all would want to try and do and get started, but then you have to think about how you're going to fund it for the future. And that has been the problem. The one in the Northeast is still fairly ad hoc, still grant dependent. So I don't know whether you want to think about how to start that. And you could do that as a second part of this RFP, so people could apply for either one.
Don?
I just wanted to support what Quay just said. It is a meeting that we all look forward to, and the managers say it's the best meeting they go to. I do think, though, that as big as the Northeast is, I think Florida might need to double the amount of time. We can do it in a day, but you've got so many different HABs that I think you'd have to, be a little more, make it bigger. And you can learn a lot from us. We're about to go back to being in person with the next meeting. When we were virtual, we had well over 100 people participating, and we did that in 2 afternoons, so it wasn't a one solid day of virtual. But we'll see what happens when it's in person. How many people? I bet will be smaller. But anyway, it is a good way to do several things: to get a review about what happened from the management standpoint, what blooms happened and what toxin was detected. But you can also have themes and bring in a particular topic for a year. This year we're sort of focusing on this big heat anomaly that's out in the North Atlantic, and how it's affecting the Gulf Stream, and the Gulf Stream is affecting the Labrador Current coming into the Gulf of Maine, and what might be happening. So that's only maybe a third of what's happening that day, but we do have that opportunity to highlight a particular topic.
So maybe what we could do is go back to reviewing some of the material from those kind of initial propositions related to a Florida HAB symposium, and review who was on the steering committee for that. And I think continue to work through some different options for how that might come to fruition. I think I like some of the things that we've discussed here. When we had the sort of initial state of the science that focused on both Karenia and freshwater cyanos, that was very well attended. I don't know the exact number of participants, but I know it filled a large auditorium. And so I think that the scale of participation is likely to be pretty extensive. I would like to flesh this out still with a marine estuarine focus before expanding to kind of all Florida HABs. Nobody's protesting violently to that, so that's good. Okay, no, I think it's a good point. I think that again, as some of these projects reach 3, 4, 5 years, there are major accomplishments, and so I think trying to highlight those, capture those accomplishments, and continue to fill gaps moving into the future. I think that this could help. I also think it speaks to the need to diversify our HAB focus. And so it gives us potentially an interesting path for going more beyond just the Karenia world. which is something that we've also discussed a fair amount at past meetings. And I think that with all of this, there's a need to know what is the current state of the science. And so I think having a regular check-in like that could go a long way. In terms of coordinating and, a regular meeting with an unknown number of participants, I am going to kind of go back to the drawing board and think through a few different potential scenarios. I know that we have a few steering committee members that were involved with that prior effort that are on the call today, but I will work with Megan to try to get a better sense of kind of where that went and try to follow up, and we may see if again, just kind of check in and see. I believe that Sea Grant was really heavily involved with that effort. I know that Leanne was on the steering committee. I believe that Barb might have been on the steering committee as well. So a good chance to go back and see. And I think it also just speaks to this ongoing need for the state of the science. I feel like that's a really great thing that's kind of emerged as almost a tool, if you will, that we've been able to use to address a lot of these algal bloom issues, to look at what we do know, what's going on right now, but also to really highlight those critical gaps. So I think that that's been really effective thus far. Okay, so Megan, are you able to comment just a little bit on a potential process where we can work on some revised language and then share it back with the task force for comment?
Well, we have two options. One is that I work with you individually, circling a document and incorporating feedback. The second is that we draft language, share it, and call a brief meeting, publicly noticed 7 days in advance, for everyone to meet again in wordsmith. But the first I can offer, we can draft it and I can send it out individually, and people can individually respond to me if they're comfortable with it or if they have any suggested edits. And then if there aren't any major concerns, we can put the call out.
That would be great. And if, as part of that process of reviewing, if the task force members could also let Megan know if you want to reconvene as a group, then we can gauge that as we go and make that decision along the way. Again, I think that we've made a lot of progress today. I think that when we get back into trying to actually craft something, it'll be good to see where we're at and how happy we are all with that. Okay, so we will work through that process. Megan will share some language for you to review, and then if there's a need to have another meeting before we post, then we will do so. And again, the intended date to get this advertised is in April. The other question, Dwayne sort of brought this up, but the accomplishments. I think that we are in a really good place again with some of these new grant projects wrapping up in the next 6 months. We've had some cooperative work that has been funded with MOAT and USF that involves expansion of our observation, tracking, modeling capabilities. I think that we are in a place where we can capture at least high-level accomplishments. And I think that that's something that is important to try to do, again, as a product. It's something that we can do kind of programmatically in terms of the growth and expansion of some of the harmful algal bloom work that's been ongoing. I think that we can also focus it on some of the work specifically recommended by the task force. When I think about trying to separate those two, there really isn't a clear separation. A lot of the time, there's a lot of connectivity, and that's exactly what we want, and trying to illustrate that will be really beneficial. But as we think about, some of these workshops and symposia, chances to pull together ideas, I think that potentially a product just kind of highlighting accomplishments. We haven't put out a product, but it would be something that could be an update to the last recommendations. I'm thinking something along the lines of a 2 to 4 page update, but that was another thing that I thought that a product that I thought that we could work on that would help give us a sense of how far we've come. And I think that's really important as we address, what still needs to happen. But so I wanted to see if there was interest and support for that. And if so, it's something that we could help begin to draft, but then we would want task force member involvement in terms of review and comment and feedback. And the intended timeline for that, it would be something, within the next, I would say 12 months. Any voices of support or opposition? Quay?
I think it's a good idea in terms of the legislative sessions and making sure they know their accomplishments to keep the money available for all this work. Is there a timeline based on that we need to consider?
I think it's slightly different for federal and state, and at least at the state level, every year is a little different in terms of when session starts and wraps up. But generally, it would start in the winter and wrap up in the spring for Florida. But I think that updates are welcome year-round.
But getting it to them before the next session would possibly be strategic. I don't know.
Yeah, I have to check and see. So aiming for something, at approximately a year to be available next January or sooner, I think would meet that requirement. Any other support or opposition or comments? Okay. Well, we're going to do it. So executive decision there. But no, I think, again, it will be a really important product. And it is something that just hearing these presentations, getting to read reports, I think we're in a really great place to be able to highlight these accomplishments, not just for you all, but for the community at large. Okay. All right, so I think we have some great things to kind of work on as next steps. I think that we're moving forward with some of the nutrient-related manners, but in a strategic way. And I'm excited to see what comes of that. So we will be working on that language for you to review, and look forward to getting those RFPs posted. We'll continue to think about what the structure for Red Tide accomplishments looks like, with a few different deliverables stemming from that, one being a short document, but the other being something more akin to a workshop. And I think that tangential, or maybe not so tangential to that, is the idea that we should consider a Florida HAB meeting. Any other comments or questions or thoughts on those next directions? Okay. All right. That brings me to the end of my agenda for today. I think that, again, we'll be in touch with some of these, and if there is a need to meet before our next meeting, Megan, would you remind me when our next meeting is? Remind us. Sorry to put you on the spot.
It's okay. The next meeting is a full day in-person meeting, and just to prepare members, let me not get the date wrong.
It's the 16th, I believe.
Thank you. Let's see.
Of what
That is
month?
correct. A full day in-person meeting, April 16th.
And Megan, I'm sending you a message right now saying that I can't be here that day. I've had I'm a member of a working group that's meeting in Europe that week. So I don't know what that means, whether you do it without me or we try to reschedule, but mine's unchangeable.
Well, if there's other members that have challenges, just let me know. And I think based on that, we'll see what we can do. Scheduling is always the biggest challenge.
Okay, well, so we'll be looking ahead to an in-person meeting in April 16th. And so as we prepare for that, we'll also have more chance to kind of discuss some of these issues. And we have long-standing agenda items, and so we'll try to give a little bit more of a heads up as to what that agenda will look like as we prepare more for that upcoming meeting. We will also try to make sure that Dana Wetzel can present some of her grant results at that upcoming meeting. So, okay. Well, we will be in touch before that meeting, and I'm not sure if we'll have the RFP posted before or right around the same time as the next meeting. So that could be a chance to kind of have a final weigh-in on that. But we'll want to have things pretty much settled by then. So I just want to say thank you to our speakers today. We had excellent speakers, and thank you to our task force members. Thank you to members of the public that joined. And with that, I will adjourn this meeting of the HAB task force. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.